It's Veterans Day at Second Chance in our Second Chance closet for Nassau Humane Society. That, of course, is always a special day, and it's an especially special day here because every year, thanks to Kate Kiffin, we have just incredible memorabilia honoring veterans. And we have a really special treat for you today. We have Penny Landrigan, who's our director, and we have Kate. And Kate is going to actually give us a video tour of what you can see here at Second Chance today.
Welcome to Second Chance, and I'd like to introduce you to Kate, who is the mastermind behind this wonderful occasion today. And Kate is a retired commander, yes, but not the chief. She's the commander in the U.S. Navy. So, Kate, take over. This is your baby.
I was asked how this all came to be, and I had to think about it. It started about 5 years ago. We were having a big staff meeting, and Penny was going over the calendar, talking about all the events that were coming up. And I raised my hand and I said, what about Veterans Day? What are we doing for Veterans Day? And I got this funny look, and they says, well, why don't you do something for Veterans Day?
We did.
As we say in the Navy, be careful what you ask for. So I started it, and it struck me that there were so many people that were coming in, not necessarily to shop, but just because they wanted to feel a sense of really being appreciated as a veteran. So every year it grew a little more from that. And then I would listen around to the community and the kinds of things that they thought should be celebrated as far as veterans, and I'd make mental notes of it for the next celebration. So that's how it came about.
So let's move around the room a little bit and show you some of our displays. We tried to cover all the branches of the military,
Yes,
correct?
we do.
So we're starting on our window over here.
So this window actually is chronological order. It celebrates the Army, which, as we know, evolved in the Army Air Corps, which then that branched off and you had the Air Force. So it's a bit of a history of that, starting with the Army all the way to the Air Force. And this is a scrapbook that my dad put together. He started out as in the Army. He was switched to the Army Air Corps, and at the time of his death, he was Air Force. But this scrapbook details the Army Air Corps after World War II, setting up consuls and embassies and whatnot in the Persian Gulf, which saw a different face after the Second World War. And then he became an Air Force officer. This is some of his memorabilia. Except for the planes. The planes are actual replicas of planes that were flown by a resident of Fernandina Beach who had a very interesting history. His last job was he flew U-2 planes and actually flew with Francis Gary Powers. And so that's where a lot of this artwork and these planes come from, either my dad or the other Air Force veteran.
And I'm proud to say that my dad was in the Army Air Corps, and he worked on the Flying Tigers,
There you go.
and proud of his service.
We'll show you pictures of Penny's dad. This was donated to us by the VFW.
I know, I just got it too.
And this is obviously a celebration of the Navy. It has some historical perspective to it as well, as the Navy has changed over the year from just a continental Navy to a world power. There's a bit of a heavy emphasis on submarines, and that's not by design but by accident, because this is a very heavy submarine community. But I wanted to capture various glimpses of naval history throughout America. This is part of the Marine Corps display, and it always captures the attention of people who come in here, and I like to see them pause and reflect, because the Marines have done so much for our country in so many diverse roles, all of them very dangerous. This is a Fernandina Beach resident who did 2 tours in Vietnam and was combat wounded. This is the new edition for this year. This is a tribute to the American Indian. I got inspired to do this when I was doing a tour of the national parks out through some of the Indian settlements. And I said, you know, this is part of our citizenry that tends to be forgotten in things. And they shouldn't have been, because they have a long history of service to our country. And they're most noted for what they called the code talkers. And they were the Choctaw Indians who would speak to each other in their native tongue and completely confused the Germans trying to decode the messages. This is a tribute to the military woman. A lot of these memorabilia are my personal ones from over the years, but we also had some contributions. A local resident who is a former woman Marine. That hat always gets a lot of attention. So many people that say they've never seen a woman's military Marine uniform. And then recently, I guess because the influence of feminism, a lot of books are coming out now about military women. And so many people don't understand that military women have been POWs over the years in large numbers.
That would be nice, right?
So I did a special tribute to the woman POW as well as the woman medical personnel. And this is a replica of the memorial in Washington, D.C., and it's to the Army nurses. And this is a tribute to the African American service members over the years. And this got an awful lot of attention last year. People know, conceptually that there's been the African American soldiers, but they didn't realize some of the dangerous missions that they were on, nor did they realize the degree of discrimination that they suffered not only while in the service but afterwards. So it was good to see people read it and reflect and talk about it. But I specifically used the Buffalo soldiers, who were crack shot soldiers in the Second World War that helped to free a lot of the small villages in Europe, and also the Tuskegee Airmen, who are a group that the more I read about, the more fascinated I become with them. But they were top-notch pilots, and they suffered a lot of discrimination as far as being able to make rank while they were in the service, and then a lot of discrimination when they got out. They wouldn't be hired by the airlines or whatever. So it's good to keep those things in mind. This exhibit was the brainstorm of one of our co-managers, Trish. And she said, we work for the animal shelters. We ought to remember that we have military service dogs. So I said, well, that's a great idea. So I went with that. I tried to get a military working dog to come, but I didn't allow enough time for that to happen. But I did get a lot of donations from some of the organizations.
This is my father, who, like I said, was in the Army Air Corps. And he worked on the Flying Tiger airplanes. Some of his memorabilia. And this is John's dad, who was who was in the Navy. And he was on the big ships, the carriers that went out to sea. Correct. How many years did he serve? 27 years he was in the Navy. He retired as a chief. And my daddy did his tour of duty during World War II, and then he came home. So it was not a career for him. But I have the flags from both of them from when they passed away.
I don't know. I wasn't there. I wasn't here.
And it's great to honor them today.
I'm going to check mine out too. Mine's still in the box.
This section here is a tribute to the United States Merchant Marines. They have a very interesting history. We've been using merchant marines in this country since the Revolutionary War. And first they were civilian, basically pirates, and then they evolved into their own hire for service group of. They were involved a lot in blockades of American ports, not only during the Civil War but during the War of 1812. They fell under the Army for a while, and then they fell under the Coast Guard, and then they fell back under the Army, and now they are their own entity. The most notable thing about them recently is that they had a high percentage of lost lives during the Second World War because they were being used to transport supplies and troops. They were targets for the enemy. But despite the fact that they had a high casualty rate, they also had a very, very high success rate. And they got all kinds of honors and awards when they left the service, such as that letter from Truman to them. But they were not recognized as veterans with all available veterans
Okay, thank you.
benefits until the 1990s.
And now we are at our Second Chance Closet store, our brand new store, and we have some displays here too, don't we, Penny?
Yes, you know, we've only been open for a couple of weeks now, but we had to stop and prepare for Veterans Day. So our windows are decorated with our red, white, and blue to show our patriotism. So we again brought some treats down here. And I don't like nothing sticky and gooey. We don't get it on our beautiful clothes. But we all down here are celebrating. Yeah.
And Kate, this is your uniform, huh?
That's my service dress uniform with all of my my medals over the years.
Tell us about your service, if you would.
I was a Navy nurse for 22 years. I had a very interesting tour. It was probably the best decision I made to go into the service, as far as the things that I got to see and do that most nurses don't get to see and do. Got to live overseas. As you can see, I spent a year on the hospital ship during the Persian Gulf War. And I was on a medical team that was trained for emergency callback for exigent circumstances, and I did all the training, but I never thought I was going to have to use it. And then Mount Pinatubo exploded in the Philippines, so they sent an emergency medical team, and I got a call in the middle of the night. So I flew to the Philippines for that, only to find out that I was the only pediatric trained practitioner there. So I was basically up for 2 days taking care of these little children. But it was a wonderful experience at the end of the day. So I did all those kinds of things.
You had how many years with this?
I had 22 years in. And I was the Navy's liaison to the Joint Commission on the Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations, and helped write a lot of the patient care standards that are still in effect now, trying to translate them into ways that made sense from the way the military had to do business. That was an interesting experience.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
And there's my husband's uniform.
Oh. Uh-huh.
Husband, he's academy graduate, spent 27 years in the Navy as a Marine, or as a submariner.
Wow.
And that is his uniform he loaned me for today.
Well, we thank you and all veterans for your service. We thank you for your dedication to the Humane Society and for sharing this memorabilia with the community.